Sherry, thank you so much for agreeing to come back and dive into some questions that came up through the webinar and that were posed by some of our registrants prior to attending the webinar. There was so much interest in what you had to say, and obviously your presentation sparked a lot of curiosity about how people could eat better, eat nutritiously with the goal of improving their health and keeping them active, which is what Choose to Move is all about. We want to foster those healthy, active lifestyles that allow us to stay physically well, socially well, mentally well. And how we fuel our bodies is a really important part of that. So we're going to spend about 20 minutes, 30 minutes going through some of these questions. Is that okay for you?
Absolutely. There were such good questions that people had brought up and really thought-provoking questions. So I hope that because we didn't get that time to cover it during the course of the presentation, we had such a little bit of time for the Q&A portion that, I really appreciate this, Sarah. I think it's great. And I hope that everyone also appreciates us being able to spend a little bit of extra time hitting those questions that got brought forward. So.
Well, I mean, nutrition is such a huge topic, and you kind of touched on all of, the core components. And I mean, we could have just done a deep dive into something specific, and we'll do that surface level dive on some of the key areas. Sure. So a big topic that came up in our questions was around inflammation, and specific to arthritis and osteoarthritis. And so many of our listeners were curious about whether or not there were nutrition best practices for people who have arthritis, osteoarthritis, and what the merits were of some like time-restricted feedings or intermittent fasting, maybe some things that people are pulling out from their clinicians or their own research. Can you comment?
Sure. So that's kind of like a two-pronged question. So let's look at the first part of that and think about that whole question about nutrition and the part it plays in inflammation, and particularly when you're thinking of arthritis and osteoarthritis, it's usually things to do with chronic pain, that people are having pain. They want to look at managing that pain. They are also probably compounded with some stiffness and those sorts of things, some contractures in muscles and joints, and particularly those joints. But one of the things that it boils down to, there's a whole area of research and in nutrition and pain management, particularly around pain management and inflammation. And so, and as it relates as well to overall health. But one of the things I really want to preface everything with saying is that, sometimes people get hung up on one particular food, or is there a food that I can eat that's really going to help? And I just want to preface everything that I say from this point forward as there are no superfoods. So it's really about the whole, everything that you eat and sort of all encompassing. So I want people to keep that in mind. While there are some great foods, it's really about having a great nutritional intake, a great diet. So let's go back and then peel back this onion just a little bit and look at, say, for example, I touched a little bit on healthy fats, and we've really found a lot of research supports that. So particularly around the omega-3 fats. And those a big contributor for omega-3 fatty acids, it's seafood. And always think of seafood as protein with benefits, because it has a multiplicity of benefits, particularly when it comes to pain management and inflammation. But so fatty fish, so salmon, mackerel. And I have to say, this is probably an old school one, but people have gotten away from it. But sardines are inexpensive. They're nutrition packed. They're so high in omega-3s. They're great tasting. I grew up with sardines, with just eating sardines with rice and a little bit of soy sauce and chopped onion on top. But I mean, and different cultures probably enjoy sardines, but they're very inexpensive. So think about the fatty fish. The fattier the fish, the better it is. Some of the other plant sources like chia, like the chia plant seeds with the chia head, those ground flax, not necessarily whole flax, because the body can't digest that. It needs to be ground. And it doesn't have a stable shelf life. So, those things, if you've got a coffee grinder, you can grind your flax seeds and expose the omega-3 fats and all of the good fiber, the prebiotic fibers that are within that. Walnuts, eggs, avocados. So there's a multiplicity of different foods that have omega-3. So omega-3 is one thing, fats, good fats, antioxidants and polyphenols. And I think I talked about that a little bit during the presentation. So, when you walk into the supermarket there, you just see this beautiful rainbow of colors. And that's really nature's pharmacy. And that's where a lot of the anti-inflammatory foods like fruits and vegetables are found, and those really have those anti-inflammatory properties. So making sure that you pile your plate, more than half of the plate, with vegetables and fruits, particularly as well oils. When you think about the oil that you use, the type of cooking oil, or the oil that you use in making salad dressing, like a really good olive oil with a little balsamic vinegar, and just shake it up, is just, it's amazing, because the taste of your vegetables comes through, and it's also a great glaze if you're going to roast vegetables. But it has a compound called oleocanthal, and that tends to be helps with chronic inflammation and inflammatory processes, as well as helping with joint cartilage damage. So olive oil is something, a good quality olive oil. Physical activity as well is key. So that gets a little bit beyond nutrition. But one of the things to keep in mind as well is, if you think of, and I call it, okay, so it doesn't have the same ring, but if you say SAD, so like that, like that's the standard American diet. So standard Canadian diet, SACAD, I don't know. It doesn't have the same ring, and it doesn't have the same sort of visceral response when you say SAD. The standard American diet is really high in ultra-processed foods, fast foods, high in refined carbohydrates. So we're talking about sugars, and also high in trans fats because of the processing. So, getting away from that and more towards, and I think we put one of these handouts in the, I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's hard to show on the.
Oh
on the
yeah,
screen.
it's not really showing.
But we have it as our
Yes.
in our resource list.
Yes, it's the mind diet, and it's kind of the combination of the Mediterranean dash, but it's also Mediterranean diet with the dash intervention for neurodegenerative delay. So that was a mouthful. Anyways, it stands for the mind diet, and it's that's a great one to follow, because it's really basic. It shows you exactly what you need to eat more of, and maybe really pile your plate on with this, and maybe watch for the rest of this this stuff at the bottom. But that diet has been really shown to be really helpful in the anti-inflammatory process, as well as many other things that have to do with health. The other thing as well is weight loss. So
right.
Yeah, I think we're going to get into some questions on that. I think you had mentioned that, and I saw some coming up in the chat. But weight loss, because for every pound of weight, there's 4 pounds of pressure that gets placed onto the the knees, hips, and it exacerbates that worsening condition. So, but that one's, if you start to look at what you're eating and what you're putting on your plate and moving, those things will come. It'll come. Don't focus on weight. Focus on the other stuff. I promise you that will come. And, thinking again of eating real foods. So if you think of the mind diet, that's really about real foods, like the less processed, the better it's going to be. So, I know it's kind of, it's sort of a stretch, but if you say, oh, look, your grandmother couldn't pronounce these ingredients, those weren't things that she was familiar with, or your great grandmother.
Exactly.
Right.
And it probably doesn't need to show up on our plate. And I do love that you bring up the physical activity piece, because often when we're more active than our usual activity, we crave different foods. And I
Yes.
know when I'm more active in a healthy way, I'm craving more nutritious foods. So it kind of goes hand in hand. Um, but I wanted to go back to that one specific question before we move on.
Mhm.
That one specific question related
Oh,
to the restrictive eating and
right,
the fasting related to arthritis management. What would
right.
you say?
So there is some, so I always like, especially with timed eating, that comes up a lot because
Yeah.
we just talked about weight management, so that comes up with that. And there is some new research that's showing alongside a high protein, having high protein intake and IF, intermittent fasting, there is some support around that. Again, it's preliminary,
Mhm.
so I mean, I wouldn't just jump on the bandwagon with that. I think that's something to discuss with your clinician, with your specialist, because would that be something for you? It's really not for everyone. And
Right.
I come from the space of eliminating rules around food and around eating, because takes away the pleasure from things. I think when you start to have to calculate, timing and being obsessive about, you know, when you have to eat foods. And I also think about brain health, because cognitive, like we talked, it's so interrelated, because your brain is the one of the biggest organs in your body, and
Yeah.
it needs nutrition, it needs sugar, not necessarily like white sugar, but it needs
But
um
carbohydrate. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it needs carbohydrate for you to think well and clearly and not have headaches and all of those things. So I think focusing on like that whole thing about when you eat versus what you're eating. I'm not entirely convinced, because I certainly look at the animal, they've been based, a lot of the studies have been based on animal research. And that's when I
Exactly.
kind of have an issue with that, in the sense that the crossover to humans, and they're a bit speculative. They're not always randomized control trials, and those are kind of the gold standard or the blue ribbon of research. And so a lot of times too, with intermittent fasting, there's a loss of muscle mass that happens.
Yes.
And so that to me really concerns me, because we talked a little bit about sarcopenia, and we talked about the fact that, that's one of the physiologic processes of aging. We naturally will lose muscle.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so that might again, speed that process up a bit. And I just see it sometimes, especially that the fasting, any type of fasting I see is sort of disordered eating behavior. So but I'm not taking it away from, it's just not for everybody. It
But
could work for some people, but I think you have to go into it with researching it and talking it over, and really determining if it's indeed for you.
yeah, and reviewing that with your clinician. And I like that you pointed out your specialist, like somebody who's specialized in arthritis care, because your family doctor might not know.
Correct.
Certainly worth posing it to them. And as we kind of flagged at the end of the webinar, reaching out to your community health clinic and seeking a consultation with a registered dietitian, even calling 811, the health line, to seek information, specialized information from a dietitian, could be a first step for some of those who are kind of delving into this inflammation management through nutrition for arthritis.
Yeah, exactly, sir. And so, there were some other questions there was one that was very specialized, that had a lot of, the person had some, really interesting things that they brought up that they were dealing with, which I think really does speak to seeing or talking to a
Yeah,
dietitian, and exactly those sources that you just mentioned. But there's one other, and I'm not sure if it's available provincially, but here in Northern Health, so in Northern British Columbia, we have, and this came out of COVID, it's a primary care virtual clinic. So
right.
folks can call in, and they can make an appointment to talk to a physician, but we also have some support for mental health. We also have substance use support, but there is also a dietitian who people
Nice.
can
Yeah.
access her services just through self-referral. And so I think she's underutilized. So anybody in the Northern Health region, and check with your other regions for if you do have virtual care clinics, because there may be a dietitian associated with it. I know they want to develop more of a multidisciplinary team for that primary care approach.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And our listeners can always call 211, which is a service to support seniors in gaining
Yes.
access to services that support. And 811 should also be able to refer to health authority specific dietitian services. So, okay, well, let's keep moving because we've got quite a few more questions.
Okay.
We'll stay in the clinical space for a moment here, if you don't
Okay.
mind, Sherry. We had a number of listeners who were interested in some top nutrition tips for people living with diabetes. And the questions didn't specify type 1 or type 2, but what kind of advice would you give broadly for people trying to manage their diabetes through nutrition? Excuse
Through
me.
nutrition.
Yeah.
Well, definitely it does make a difference whether it's type 1 or type 2, but to get specific, but let's just talk generally. And so nutrition really is key when it comes to that. And one of the slides that I put up, and I hope people took a look at the Betty White commercial, because I just think
It's so funny. Yeah.
it's so
It's so
funny,
bang
right?
on. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't recommend having a Snickers bar. It does make the point about, that whole fluctuation in your blood sugar levels and what that does. And for somebody who has a predisposition to diabetes or is actually clinically diagnosed with diabetes, that is a recipe for disaster. You don't want to have your blood sugar levels going all over the place. So really important to make sure that your meal timing is in place, that, if you're going to be on the go or traveling somewhere, or, going to a community maybe that you haven't been to before, learn to take your food with you, pack a little lunch kit or whatever, and have some snacks and have some, a go bag ready, because that's really important. You can't always rely on where you're at in your environment. I always talk, I also work with athletes. So that's a really key point, because when they get, to a competition in a one-horse town and there's just a gas station and, there's not a whole lot of selection there, but yeah, so make sure timing is key, and make sure you have, when you're eating meals, make sure that you're combining protein with carbohydrate, a little bit of that good fat. That's going to carry over the blood sugar level. And you saw that in the graph that was in the slide, versus having that peak and then a drop. You're going to have that nice gradual increase, and then it's going to carry over. And by the time it comes down to the point where, your blood sugar level is low, you're already having another snack or another meal. And so, you get that continual supply of blood sugar. So that's really important. Making sure that you're eating, that whole thing with the food guide, that plate is so great. And whether it's diabetes or whether it's, there's so many applications to that. But vegetables and fruits, key. And then whole grains, absolutely key. The fiber is particularly important. And so we think of slow carbohydrates. So slow, sometimes people call them simple carbs, but so I had a really funny cartoon that was depicting simple carbs versus refined carbs. Like, the refined carb was all snotty and being a snob, and the simple carb was, but anyways, I didn't bring that, but people could visualize that. But anyways, I digress. Simple, the slow carbohydrate is the one that's going to have more fiber, and that's going to be releasing those nutrients and the sugars within the carbohydrate at a much slower level. And so it's not hitting your bloodstream and getting right into a peak. And so, things like whole grains, making sure that you're choosing higher fiber foods, and you're going to get better blood sugar level control. Exercise and physical activity again comes into play, because It's an absolute imperative factor in blood sugar, making sure your blood sugars stay in control. And when you get that report card, that A1C report card, your doctor will be patting you on the back, and you'll be patting yourself on the back because you did a really good job. So, and it's really not about trying to get somewhere quick. It's always about moderation being the key, and
Yeah.
small little things that you do really make big differences over time.
Totally. Yeah. Like building in those habits. And certainly many of our listeners are Choose to Move current participants
Yes,
or past participants. And a big thing that we work on is setting goals and working towards those goals incrementally. And I think the same kind of approach can be applied not just to our physical activity, but also to our nutrition goals.
absolutely. So, yeah.
And certainly, like, I really appreciate you kind of doing an overview on some considerations for diabetes care with respect to nutrition and arthritis. And I know that everybody's clinical condition is different. So really just underscoring that need to kind of consult with your doctor, consult with that specialized team who knows certain bits of information that are specific to individuals. Many people over the age of 65 are dealing with multiple chronic conditions, and we might focus on one more than the other, but how we nourish our body and how we manage our health needs to kind of factor in all of those pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard it been said before that if we all lived long enough, we would all develop diabetes. Like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's about slowing that process and doing it gradually. So that whole Mediterranean diet approach, all of those great healthy fats, whole grains, vegetables, and it really goes back to that key theme. I hope people are getting that as we're
Yeah.
talking about they're talking about the same thing.
I know. Well, it all comes back to that simple approach. Well, simple, but sometimes complex to implement approach.
It's true.
So we've got quite a few more questions, and we don't want to take too much time here in reviewing those. But so let's punch through a bunch of these here
Okay.
related to weight.
Mhm.
You mentioned it with respect to arthritis management. Many questions on how do I get my weight down while still acquiring the necessary nutrients I need. What about this muscle mass loss? And how does nutrition come into play? How do I minimize sarcopenia or the loss of muscle mass? Certainly older women interested in weight management after menopause.
Mm.
So any broad comments to say about weight management?
Wow, that was a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
One of the things I think about weight management, it almost sounds like a job. You're a weight manager.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I think one of the biggest things is that we need to be compassionate with ourselves. You just mentioned about menopause, and I think about, hormones and what a huge impact that has on your body, how you feel, and really, yes, physically, like there are some, and for both women and men, things change. Gravity takes its force, and the body shifts, and you have changes in your weight distribution patterns. Part of it is because of hormones, part of it is because of aging, and we all have those shifts in body composition, and I think we need to be kind to ourselves. We talk about, especially through the age of COVID, being kind to others. I think one of the first things we need to do is turn that back and look at ourselves, and with sometimes the way we talk to ourselves, would we be our own best friend? And I would say probably 75 to 80% of the time, maybe not. We need to be kinder. And but it's a realism, and it's true for some people where they are frustrated, or that extra weight is causing some health issues, and
Right.
that's problematic in that regard. So again, think of small changes that you can make over time. Please don't go on a crazy diet or something that you heard that so-and-so is eating cabbage soup and, or, just eating keto or whatever. Like, they're never sustainable. If there
Right.
was some magic bullet and something that people could do, they would get a Nobel Peace Prize. It's just
Exactly.
as simple as that. Like, there really isn't any magic bullet. I mean, the latest thing now is, people taking Ozempic, right?
Right.
That's a whole other issue. So we won't
Yeah.
even get into that, but let's talk about nutrition and what you could do. Well, first of all, one of the things, which it almost seems counterintuitive, but when I work with clients, one of the biggest things, particularly women, that I see is I find they're not eating enough.
Yeah.
You're just simply not eating enough. They're as you start to get older, your metabolism winds down. Well, you lose muscle mass, so your metabolism will tend to be blunted and wind down as well. So then you start to decrease your number of your intake or your calories, and that also takes your metabolic response down another notch. So you're eating fewer and fewer calories and subsisting on that. So one of the things, and it doesn't happen overnight, but you have to fuel your metabolic, you have to stoke your metabolic furnace. So think about a campfire and some burning embers or whatever, and you take a stick and you poke at it and you start to get the heat going, right? The heat going, and then, suddenly you get a flame. And that's what I want people to think about when they're thinking food causes a metabolic response. And so you need to feed your body, and you need to make sure that you're eating enough protein with not just enough energy, but making sure that you're eating enough proteins to support your metabolism and also support those muscles, right? The muscle mass. And older adults, as I spoke about, the new research that's coming out is older adults need more protein.
Right.
Yeah, and not just to backload your protein into dinner, because what they found is that a lot of older adults eat very small in the morning, like in the daytime, maybe about 15%, and then they backload everything at dinner. We want to space it out during the day. So, I was talking about 25 to 30 grams. So if you think like nuts, like a half a cup of nuts or something, like, I mean, not to have that all at once, but maybe you might want to space it out, but that's about 30 grams of protein. A 4 to 5 ounce piece of meat, like whether it's chicken or fish or Greek yogurt. Greek yogurt is really high in protein, right? So beans as well, beans, peas, and lentils are good high protein sources. Soy, quinoa for people that are more plant-based. But definitely thinking about increasing that amount of, or watching the amount of protein. Maybe you don't have to increase it. Like, people are at different places, but that's definitely going to help to reduce the risk of sarcopenia and support your muscle mass maintenance. Because I think one of the mantras as well is it's live strong to live long.
Exactly. That's a good one. And, we have to, keep in mind, muscle weighs more than fat. So the more active we get, sometimes we're building muscle, and
Yes.
our weight might go up as a result. And we also know from the physical activity literature that we can be fit and technically overweight.
Yes.
And actually being fit is a better predictor of morbidity and mortality than being overweight. So I think, like you have said, maintaining that healthy plate, the Mediterranean diet, that balance between complex carbohydrates and protein and good fats and a regular physical activity.
Yes.
And then the form will come, and we also have to be kind with the fact that as we age, our form changes, and this is natural.
And that's okay. And embracing all of that too. One of the things that when people are saying they're overweight, it's like I often think, and I see when I go to the thrift store and I see the graveyard of scales, and it makes the dietitian's heart so happy that there's all these scales that people have abandoned. So I would encourage people that are listening in to, like, First of all, ask yourself, are you a jockey? No, probably not. Scales belong on fish. You do not need to weigh yourself. You need to think about how you feel in your clothes and how you feel in your body. And that's the most important thing. And fuel yourself well so that that restrictive form of eating is definitely, think about it this way. Think about balance. We talk about balance and a pendulum shift. So if that pendulum, because you're saying, oh, I shouldn't eat this, or I'm not going to eat this, or I'm restricting how much I'm eating, that pendulum is going to shift, and it's going to shift all the way up here. And how long is it going to be able to stay there? Probably not a whole long time. It's going to let go, and it's going to let go with a vengeance, and it's going to shift all the way back to the other side. So we want to find that nice, that place in between, right? And not have those pendulum swings, and that sometimes come along with restrictive eating. But one of the other things I want to talk about too, Sarah, is just to mention, we want to interject physical activity into all of this, and resistance training. So not to resist training, so right, but resistance training, which is using weights, using water, using your own body weight, is such a great way to preserve and build muscle mass as people age. But not just that, it also preserves your bone integrity and your bone strength. So so many benefits that way.
Yeah, that's right. And our listeners have heard us talk lots about physical activity. They get lots of physical activity support within Choose to Move, and resistance training is key, absolutely, as we're aging and we have all this shifting in our muscle composition as we age.
Sorry, I
go
know
for
you're
it. No, it's
ready to
good.
move on, but then my thoughts are still going. Two other things that I want people to consider as well when it comes to not just hormones, but think about sleep. Because as adults get older, I hear people say how many times that they have trouble getting to sleep, falling asleep, staying asleep, that they are, subsisting on very little sleep. What that does is it really sets your body up for a stress response, and it causes inflammation, and it causes a release of a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol tends to create more of that belly fat, the type of fat, that abdominal fat that deposit, right? So cortisol is not something, and cortisol also beyond just sleep, stress. So we all have, life happens. There are things that happen, and stress is a reality of life. We don't want to have zero stress, because zero stress would mean you're dead. But that there's, again, it comes to that whole thing about balance, right? And so finding that balance of good stress or how you cope and interpret stress. So finding some tools to be able to cope with your stress and manage stress, because it's a reality. It's not going to go away. There are so many things that happen on the daily that we can't predict, that sometimes are beyond our control and cause us stress. So, and
really important to factor in sleep when we're thinking about our nutrition and stress management. This could be like a whole webinar in itself around stress eating, and but we won't go there, but just knowing that, like, managing our stress and considering what that means for overall health, and that's great. Any other points there, Sherry, before we move on?
No, I think there was something coming up that I saw around cravings. People were talking about cravings.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually where I was going to go next, was around sugar.
I'm reading your mind.
You are. You're totally reading my mind. So we had lots of questions on sweets and how to reduce sugar consumption. And like you said, it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's in all of our products, whether we want them to be there or not. And I think that underscores your earlier points around eating whole foods and avoiding the processed foods. But lots of people, highlighting how much they love sugary foods, and they're finding it difficult to reduce their sugar consumption. They're trying to swap out maybe a refined sugar product for blueberries and other seasonal fruits, but they still crave sugar on their cereal, for example. And even some people noting that they're craving sugar more than they did in their younger years. So what would you say about those sugary cravings, Sherry?
So, again, cravings go back to what's going on. Is there something is that something that's, systemic, like it's something that's happening on a chronic basis, or it's something that's sort of an acute thing that's just happening now? Is there something that's changed where, your stress responses have changed? Are you feeling like, are your blood sugars normalized? So
Yeah.
something that has an effect as well. Like, are your blood sugars stable? Tiredness, like you get to that fatigue point where you're craving that, or you feel like you're craving that. And hormones, believe it or not, also play a factor in, so hormonal balance. So sometimes these things, you may think that they're just in your mind or something, but it's physiological, and you're actually having a physical response to that. So again, cut yourself some slack. It's all okay. And now, how much sugar are you eating? Are you sitting there with a big sugar bowl? So that would be my question too. Like, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about, a real overconsumption where you're just putting sugar on everything, or are you're feeling like you're guilty about sprinkling a bit of sugar on your cereal? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, depends on the type of cereal, of course, because I'm thinking that it's probably more like a bran flake or something like that. That we're not talking about, the
Honey
mini
Nut
wheats
Cheerios.
or mini wheats that are coated in, they have that
Frosting.
like
Yeah.
it's like a little bit of a cake icing or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking it's not that.
Yeah.
So I mean, put that into perspective and think about that. And if you're, using sugar, like, it's okay. Having a sweet snack every once in a while is okay too. Those things they're part of enjoying life and what life is all about. So again, give yourself permission, and don't feel guilty about that, but put it into context again. I mean, what does that look like for you? Trying some different things, like, dark chocolate, definitely. And there's one by Lindt that it's not just the dark chocolate, but it has this kind of like a smooth, moussey kind of a middle in it. And it's like, it's quite decadent, but so do you eat the whole bar, or do you take a couple of squares of it, like, and really enjoy it, like with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and really there's a hedonic, like an actual pleasurable response to really enjoying your food. And like, if you're by yourself, make noise. Yum. Have you ever seen What About Bob? Have you ever seen that?
I don't recall.
What About Bob is a movie from a few years ago, and it was Richard Dreyfuss was a psychiatrist, and Bill Murray was a psychiatric patient that befriended him as a patient, but then developed this sort of taboo relationship about having a heavy reliance on his therapist, but even showing up at his house. And of course, Richard Dreyfuss's wife invited Bob to have dinner with them. And there's actually a scene where he is enjoying the dinner so much, and he's verbalizing it. And it's actually funny, but it's wonderful to hear. And you should enjoy that. So take the time to really, if you're going to have something, and make it pleasurable. Don't just, hide it or eat it quickly so nobody sees you. Like, really enjoy it. Fruit, again, is nature's sweet treat. So grapes, blueberries, cherries, the frozen fruit is so yummy. Like, it
Yeah, as a special little treat. Totally.
One of the things that I do, because frozen fruit is so high in nutrition as well, those frozen berries that have tons of antioxidants, so great for your brain. Take some Greek yogurt, vanilla flavored, and you can just make a little yogurt parfait, put a little bit of granola or something on top, or a little sprinkle of cinnamon. And as the berries kind of are half thawed, it's almost like an ice cream treat. Like,
Yeah.
trust me, it is. It's so wonderful. Or on the other hand, take like whatever your favorite, like at nighttime, like take your favorite beverage, like your milk or an oat milk or a soy, and steam your milk and put a little bit of brown sugar on it, a little bit of cinnamon, and that frothy, steamy, it's so good.
Just like a little dessert in itself.
Yes,
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
cup. It's so
But it's
wonderful.
so nutritious. It's packed full. And I think too, it's about like what we eat, not like in total. What I'm trying to say is, have that piece of fruit or that, portion of vegetables and your cake at dessert.
Yeah.
Don't swap one for, swap out the good stuff for the bad stuff. Make sure that you're getting the full nutrition throughout your day. And then the dessert is an add-on treat on occasion, and be intentional about that. I really like your points around enjoy it, be intentional, pause and be present when you're eating it,
Yeah.
because we'll probably crave less when we're doing that.
Absolutely, because you are providing for yourself. You are feeding not only your body, but your mind and your soul at the same time. And watch that clip of Bill Murray, because that will give you pause, and it will also give show you what you should be doing.
Well, listen, I'm going to kind of pose two categories of questions before we close.
Okay.
One is on meal solutions and one is on supplements. So
Okay.
maybe we'll start off just on the supplements because it's a bit more brief. But what's your view on supplements overall? If we are consuming a healthy, nutritious, balanced meal or diet, what are your opinions about supplements specific for seniors? And there were a couple questions specific to iron and vitamin B12 and our B vitamins. What kind of nutrition deficiencies should we be keeping in mind when we're considering supplements?
The questions about supplements are so good, because back in, back in the day when I was taking my undergraduate and, a young practicing dietitian, that was the thing. It was like, eat the 4 food groups, you'll be fine. And what I've come to realize is, oops, I don't think so. What we realized through the analysis that we've done, looking at populations and what people are under consuming, is that, people really aren't doing as well as sometimes they think they are. And so a supplement is not going to hurt. It's probably going to help. So, a good multivitamin definitely is an approach. I think is particularly for seniors we're living in a parallel where we don't get a whole lot of sunlight, vitamin D, and vitamin D is photosynthesized through our skin. And when we're all hearing the health the recommendations of wearing sunscreen, your skin doesn't synthesize vitamin D when you've got sunscreen on. So that's kind of a double-edged sword right there. Right. But yeah, so a vitamin D supplement, I think, is a good, or looking for foods that are fortified with vitamin D.
Yeah.
Making sure that that's part of your intake. Omega-3s, a fish oil supplement, I don't think that is something that would be a bad thing. And B vitamins, like the B12s and whatnot, because as people get older, they tend to make less of something called intrinsic factor, which is part of, what happens, normal physiological aging of your gut. And that's where B12 gets synthesized, is in your gut. And so, taking those B vitamins would be good as well, a good prescriptive approach. And particularly because the B vitamins tend to have neurologic support, so helpful
Right.
in cognitive function and brain health. So overall, so let's break that down and go back. And a good multivitamin, make sure it's got vitamin D in it, something that's active vitamin D. And so, or taking a supplement aside that, and then an omega-3 fatty acid. So
Yeah. And of course, all of
good
this
job.
in context to everybody's individual clinical needs and consulting with your
Absolutely.
physician, making sure that they know, especially if you're managing a chronic condition or multiple chronic conditions, that your care providers know what supplements you're taking. And a lot of medical forms now are asking for, those supplement lists. So
Supplements, yeah.
taking stock of those, because they can interact with um, various medications that you might be
And
prescribed.
herbal supplements as well, because
Herbals, yeah,
people tend to think of herbal supplements as being innocuous, and that that they can be quite powerful, and
exactly.
like you said, have some interactions with medication. So always good just to check and make sure that what you're doing, everybody knows about, right?
So in our last couple of minutes, and again, I feel like this could be a webinar topic in and of itself, but any kind of broad suggestions related to meal solutions? We might be cooking for one or two when we were used to cooking for many more than that in our younger lives. Or, we might be considering those new meal home delivery plans, or we're struggling with portion control. Any hot tips for access to healthy recipes?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, ultimately you can talk about nutrition until, the cows come home, but it's really what ends up in your cart and on your plate, right? So that's what's going to make the difference. And does it look good? And does it taste
Hmm.
good? And are you
Hmm.
going to eat it, right? And yes, that definitely is a real factor, cooking for one and two, and trying to get beyond just, oh, I'll just make some toast and have some tea, right? That's
Yeah.
the tea and toast syndrome. So don't fall victim to that. Make eating a pleasurable experience. Invite people to come and join you. And I sent out, I think in the links, we did, there's it's age old. I think it's actually from the 70s, but it's called The Senior Chef. And it is called The Senior Chef, Cooking for One and Two. And I think we put a link to it in the resources.
Perfect.
And there's the Senior's Handbook. And I also sent out or provided a link to a resource from my colleagues at Spark RD.
Right.
Who have put out great recipes that I think people will really enjoy. They're fun and easy to make. But as far as the meal prep kits, I think those are a great idea too, because it prompts you to try some different things that maybe you haven't tried before. They've got quite a selection of different things. They're differing in you can get gluten-free, you can get vegetarian, you can get all kinds of different types of meals. So the biggest thing is, though, they're a subscription service, so you've got to monitor that. Like,
Yes.
don't get caught up in them just sending you the default selection. Make sure that you're up on selecting them. You can put them on hold for any time, or you can cancel them. There's no commitment and no contract. So I kind of like that. And
Yeah.
it gets you trying some new things. It's the same thing as, those salad kits and stuff like that. I've had conversations with colleagues where they're like, well, those are so expensive. And, anytime anybody does any preparation, it costs more money. And I'm like, well, when it goes into that drawer that we call the crisper, but I call it the rotter sometimes
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Right.
nothing there gets any crisper. At least sometimes at my house, like we had that conversation about if it doesn't get cut up and ready to eat, like it doesn't
It
get
doesn't.
eaten. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I say, like, if someone's going to eat it, just because it's prepped in a bag with the dressing and whatever, like
Everything ready to go.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
But realize it's going to cost a little bit more money. So if that's something that's affordable and can be something that people can factor into their budgets, by all means. And maybe just try it one or two times, and it gives you ideas for they give you recipes. Like I know one of them has things that are more common, and they actually give you things that so you can recreate that if that becomes a favorite dish. So look for ones like that where you can recreate it without having the subscription part of it, and maybe just make those meals once you've experimented with some new flavors. But that's part of eating. Experiment with new things and have fun with your food.
Yeah. Oh, Sherry, such good advice. I'm gonna call my CRISPR the broader, and I'm gonna not feel guilty buying a pre-made meal if it means that I'm gonna eat all of the food groups that I'm aiming to eat. That's a really, really good point. And then hopefully new habits form, and I'm motivated to make more salads.
Yay. Yes.
I think we're going to close here. Take home messages for sure. That balanced plate, Mediterranean food guide, consulting with our clinicians, 211 for senior specific services in our province, 811 for dietitian
So
support.
many resources. Yeah.
And our web page for this webinar that's chock full of all the resources that you gave.
Exactly. Yeah. So check those out. And on the PowerPoint, I believe that you're also providing folks with the PowerPoint.
That's
It
right.
has my contact information. So if I've missed anything, I think we talked about iron and calcium. I think I put some fact sheets in there as well. But if I'm missing anything or there's something that really comes to mind, please don't think you're bothering me by reaching out. I love to hear from you. And so please, by all means, reach out. And one final thought though, Sarah,
Yes.
I want to tell people, I want you to eat vegetables and fruits like it's your job.
Like it's my business.
Yes.
Okay, I love it. Love it. Well, that's a great message to close off on. Sherry, so much gratitude for your expertise and your time. And on behalf of our Choose to Move webinar followers, just wishing you all the best and hope to have you back again soon.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Take care.